The silver tray wobbled in her frail hands as the front doorbell echoed through the grand house. Miss Helena, with graying hair peeking under her faded maid's cap, adjusted her posture, forcing her back to stay straight despite the persistent ache in her spine. 40 years ago, she was a mother, a wife, a dreamer. Now, she was just the help in a mansion owned by people who never bothered to ask her name. Tonight was no different. The guests arrived one after another, women in shimmering cocktail dresses, men in sleek, overpriced suits. The air buzzed with laughter, champagne fizz, and the smell of wealth. As Helena quietly stood in the background, hands clasped in front of her apron, she watched the world swirl around her, a world so far from the one she once knew. Her job was simple: serve, smile, and be invisible. But someone at the party had other plans. "You!" A sharp voice shot across the room. Helena turned slowly, already stiff from a full day of cleaning floors and polishing silver. A young woman, no older than 30, stood by the grand piano holding a wine glass like it was a baton of royalty. Her dark hair was pinned into a sleek bun, and her heels clicked with power across the marble floor. "Yes, ma'am?" Helena said softly. The woman's lips curled. "Don't ma'am me like you're some Victorian ghost. Did you polish this silver?" She gestured to the utensils on the dining table. "I did, this morning," Helena said modestly. "Well, they're dull. Like your entire presence." She said it loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. People glanced over, some chuckled under their breath. Helena remained composed, but her hands trembled slightly. "Do you want the guests to catch something from your fingerprints?" "I could see the smudges," the young woman hissed. A woman beside her snorted. "Please tell me she's not touching the wine glasses. I'm not drinking from anything that's been in her hands." Helena bowed her head slightly, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, I'll replace them." The young woman sipped her wine and nodded. "See that you do. Honestly, with her around, I'd rather drink from the bottle." The crowd laughed. No one defended Helena. Everyone turned away just fast enough to not be part of the humiliation while still enjoying it. From the kitchen, Bernard, the young male cook, peeked through the door, anger rising in his chest. He saw Helena's lowered eyes, the way she swallowed her pride. She had told him once in passing that she had a son she hadn't seen in decades, that life hadn't been kind, that some things were better left unspoken. But Bernard also knew something no one else did, not even Helena. The young woman doing all the shouting. Her name was Clarice Montenegro, and Clarice was Helena's future daughter-in-law. But neither of them knew that, not yet. "I swear, where do you even find maids like this?" Clarice whispered to another guest. "Creaky, slow, and always in the way. I told Damien his family had weird taste, but this is a different level." Damien, her fiancé, out of town for a business trip, he had insisted she throw the engagement party at his parents' estate. Said it would show her how it felt to be part of a real family, an established one. And Clarice had agreed, though she saw the house as ancient and boring. "Excuse me," Helena whispered again, trying to walk past. Clarice stepped deliberately into her path. "Oh no, are you leaving with untouched dishes already? No wonder the place is slipping." "I was going to the kitchen to hide? Or because your memory's shot?" Clarice raised her voice. More people turned their heads now. A few gasped, though no one interrupted. Helena stayed silent. She had learned that silence was cheaper than dignity when you're poor. "Do you know what your problem is?" Clarice leaned down. Helena could feel her expensive perfume. "You're not just old. You're unnecessary. That's your real problem." For a moment, something flickered in Helena's expression. Pain, yes, but something else. Deeper. Deeper than humiliation. So deep, it didn't even show on the surface. Meanwhile, Bernard slipped into the pantry, pulled out his phone and opened the photo Damien had once shared. One old, torn image he'd saved from a dusty childhood box. "My real mom," Damien had told him months ago. "She vanished when I was 7. Dad remarried. I never found her again." The photo was old, but for Bernard, it clicked now. Miss Helena. She wasn't just the maid. She was Damien's lost mother. Bernard bolted from the kitchen. Back at the party, Clarice was summoning another wave of laughter. I mean, really, I feel like I should give her a walker or something, maybe a GPS to find her way back to the kitchen. Just then, a sharp voice interjected, cutting through the noise. Enough! Everyone turned. The chef had never dared speak mid-party before. Bernard's face was pale, almost shaking. That woman you keep insulting. Clarice crossed her arms. Is she your grandma or something? She's someone's mother, Bernard shot back. Someone close, someone you claim to love. Clarice paused. What? Her name. Bernard stepped forward, his voice quivering. Her name is Helena Montelier. She's Damien's biological mother. There was a chilled silence. Clarice stared at him like he had sprouted horns. That's impossible, she whispered. She gave him up when he was young. She thought it was best. He never knew what happened, but he remembered her name. Clarice looked around, suddenly self-conscious, her mask cracking. That's not... Damien's mother is in London, some composer or something. His stepmother, the one his dad remarried. Bernard turned to Helena, who hadn't moved. Miss Helena, do you have a son? Helena's lips parted for a second, parsing what was happening. Yes, but I haven't seen him since he was 7. His name is... Damien? Bernard asked. Her voice trembled. Yes. Clarice dropped her glass. It shattered like the illusion of certainty. No, Clarice muttered, her voice barely finding the courage to rise. No, that can't be true. The wine pooled around the shards at her feet, glinting like red rubies under the chandelier's warm light. No one dared move. The air in the room had taken on weight, the kind that bends people's spines and twists their tongues. Helena stood quietly, her hands trembling by her sides. Not from fear, she had known fear. This was different. This was the invisible skin of old wounds tearing back open. Helena tried to speak, shaking her head. I never planned to see him this way. I didn't even know... Clarice looked at the frail woman as if she were turning into stone, or worse, something real. This is some kind of joke, she spat, defensive now, drowning in her own humiliation. I don't believe this. Damien would have told me. He didn't know, Bernard said. He never knew where she went. She disappeared from his life. All he had was a photo and a name. You must be confused, Clarice said sharply, twisting around. There are thousands of women named Helena. And how many of them know his full name? Bernard asked. His full birthday? The kind of mole he has on his wrist? Ask her. Helena lifted her eyes. There was an ache in them so raw, Clarice almost stepped back. April 12th, 1995, Helena whispered. He had a birthmark shaped like a comma just under his left wrist. He used to hide it when he was nervous. The detail turned Clarice cold, because she had seen that mark. And now, what had sounded like old nonsense, like one of those sad Cinderella subplots, suddenly felt immovable. Suddenly, she was the villain. But Clarice would, and let herself falter, not here, not in front of these people. Every guest was watching, every friend secretly judging, some already texting the scandal to group chats. So what if it's true? She snapped. She gave him up. She left him. I didn't leave because I wanted to, Helena whispered. Everyone strained to hear. His father took him after the divorce. I wasn't rich. I had nothing. Her voice caught in her throat. I tried for years to find him, but I was just a maid, a nobody. I didn't go to court. I didn't have lawyers. All I had was a hope that maybe one day. Clarice cut in coldly. You should have tried harder. The silence this time wasn't frozen. It was hot as fire. Bernard clenched his hands behind his back. The guests, unsure if this was a soap opera or someone's real, bleeding life, fluttered near the hallway or the edge of their chairs. You have no idea what it means to try when the world doesn't care if you fail, Helena said, louder now. Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from years of silence unspooling like thread. You've only ever had choices. You don't know what it's like to lose your child because you couldn't afford a second bus ride. Clarice glanced away, jaw tight and trembling. Miss Helena, one of the other guests began, awkward but sincere. Is this really Damien's mom? Helena looked over at him with eyes full of grief and grace. She didn't answer, didn't have to. Her silence was thunder. And just then, almost cruelly, the front door opened. Luggage wheels echoed on the marble. Keys jangled. Then came the voice Clarice had once longed to hear every morning and night of her life. "Clarice?" "Damien." He paused at the entryway, a small suitcase in one hand, his coat slung over his arm. His eyebrows knitted the moment he saw the tension in the room. "What's going on?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was a nervous undertone. "Why is everyone so quiet?" Clarice turned rigid. "Damien, But before she could explain, his eyes landed on Helena, and Helena's eyes, those silent, rich eyes, found him. It happened in an instant. All her years of heartbreak, silence, and sheer survival translated into one trembling step forward. "Damien?" The sound of his name from her mouth was like a ghost rising from history and memory and soul. He froze. She tried to hold herself together. "I never thought—" "Wait," he said quietly, looking at her closer now. His eyebrows pulled together. "Have we met?" She smiled through tears. "Yes, but not like this. This is the maid," Clarice cut in sharply, trying to reassert control. "She's been working here under your stepmother's staff. I didn't know who she was either. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but—" "She's my real mother," Damien said suddenly, softly. Everyone turned toward him. His voice had no performative edge, no flourish, just the stunned realization crashing into him like rain on long, dry soil. He stepped forward. "The photo," he murmured. "The one in the old dresser, the woman holding me with the blue blouse. That's you." Helena sobbed. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered. Damien didn't know he had tears until they fogged his vision. The rest of the room faded. What were the guests doing? What words were Clarice saying behind him? He didn't know. All he saw was his mother. "I looked for you," he said. "Every year on my birthday. I told myself the same lie, that if you were alive, maybe you just didn't want me." "I wanted you more than I wanted breath itself," Helena whispered, and Damien, who had grown through life with a hollow in his chest, stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. The guests, no longer amused, no longer smirking, lowered their champagne glasses. The softest sob escaped Helena's chest, muffled against the shoulder of the man who once called her mama before he understood what that meant. Clarice stood behind them like a statue cracked through the midi. She had insulted a woman she couldn't care less about, who turned out to be someone she couldn't afford to disrespect, someone who could decide everything now. Clarice felt every eye swing back toward her like judgment from the universe itself. But no pair of eyes stung more than Damien's when he finally looked at her, really looked, like he was trying to reconcile the woman he'd loved with the person who'd humiliated his mother. His hold on Helena loosened gently as he stepped back, his expression unreadable. He turned to Clarice. "What happened here?" Clarice chuckled nervously, brushing strands of hair behind her ears and smoothing down her dress, pretending as though the weight of the moment didn't crush her completely. "Babe, I didn't know who she was," she began. "I didn't mean anything by it. I just thought she was, the maid." "You thought she was the maid, so you thought it was okay to mock her. In front of my friends?" "I didn't mock her," Clarice lied, her eyes darting to the shattered glass on the floor. "People were joking around, and she—" "Clarice," Bernard interjected quietly, stepping forward. "I know what you said. I heard all of it. You insulted her age, her usefulness, even called her unnecessary. You made the guests laugh at her." Damien blinked slowly. I can explain," Clarice repeated, her voice cracking now. "Explain what?" Damien asked, softly but firmly. "That you treat people based on their status. That if she hadn't been my mother, you were fine embarrassing her. Tell me, Clarice, would you have let her keep kneeling if no one stopped you?" "I didn't know," she whispered. "That's the entire point." He took a deep breath. "You didn't know, because you didn't care to." Clarice's throat tightened. "I mean—" Her voice got smaller. She wasn't dressed like anyone important. She didn't seem like someone worth... Damien's face shifted. Like someone worth respecting. The crowd had fallen completely silent. Even the music had been turned off long ago, as if the sea, Pikas themselves didn't dare interrupt. She opened her mouth to mend the moment, but every word that came to her felt shallow, plastic. Nothing would land. Nothing would make this look right. "I'm sorry," she said finally, eyes flicking desperately toward Helena. "Really, I never meant to hurt her, I swear." Helena, still pale, still weary, simply nodded. "We endure. That's what women like me do." The grace in her voice only made the silence colder. It was the kind of response that didn't seek comfort, but offered it anyway. Damien ran a hand down his face and turned back to her. "Do you want to stay here?" he asked gently. "You don't have to work anymore." "I don't want to leave just yet," Helena replied softly. "If you'll have me. There's too much missing time between us. I can help, even just a little." Clarice swallowed a sob. "Damien, baby, I'm sorry. Please don't make this into something bigger than it is. I love you." He looked at her, the way someone looks at a fire they once lit and are now unsure how to put out. "Love," he repeated, more to himself than anyone else. Then he smiled, but sadly. What a thin word people make it sometimes. Clarice's composure shattered. "But this was supposed to be our future," she whispered. "Our life. I don't want a future where my partner degrades the woman who gave me life." "It wasn't personal," Clarice said quickly. Then, realizing what she had said, she froze in horror. Damien nodded slowly, as if her truest self had finally stepped from behind the theater curtain. "That's exactly the problem." He pocketed his hands and looked around. "Would everyone please give us a moment?" Guests began filing out awkwardly, the kind of exodus that happens when a dream dinner party spirals into something raw and human. Helena too turned to leave. "Mom," Damien said, stopping her for the first time with a word she hadn't heard in decades. She looked at him like she couldn't believe he had said it. "You can stay," he told her. A tear rolled down her cheek, and she gave a weak but joyful nod, sitting quietly on one of the sofas nearby. Clarice, meanwhile, took a deep breath, but it didn't stop the panic building in her chest. "You're not going to call off our engagement over this, are you?" "I don't know," Damien said. "But I need time to reassess who we are, what we are." "I've never hurt you," she pleaded. "I never did anything wrong to you." "You don't hurt people to their faces, Clarice. That's what makes it worse." His voice trembled at the edges. "What happens when your mother gets old, or sick? What happens to my family when I'm not around?" She shook her head, eyes brimming. "You keep saying sorry because you're afraid of what you'll lose," he continued flatly. "Not because you understand what you did." She couldn't argue. Clarice stood frozen while Damien walked over to the couch and sat beside Helena, carefully wrapping one comforting hand over hers. "Our paths weren't meant to cross this way," Helena said gently, brushing a tear with her sleeve. "I never wanted you to find me surrounded by shame." "I found you," Damien said, voice cracking. "And that's all that matters now." Clarice watched the image of mother and son, finally united after nearly 3 decades. And for the first time in her life, she felt like the outsider on her own stage. Behind her, Bernard passed by with a tray, nodding to Helena. She smiled faintly at the gesture. As Clarice turned toward the door, guests still lingered in conversation. She wasn't the center anymore, not even close. She picked up her coat, her heels clicking emptily as she left the room, her place in Damien's life uncertain now. At the door, she turned for one last glance at the boy she once planned to marry, the man she may have just lost. And the maid, no, the mother, she never thought to respect. The early morning sun stretched across the mansion, glinting off the marble floors Helena had once scrubbed on her knees. But that day, she didn't wear a maid's apron. She wore a light shawl draped over her shoulders, and her back, although bent slightly with age, carried a different kind of weight now. One laced with dignity, She stood on the balcony, a cup of warm tea in her hands, watching the sunrise melt into sky. After so many years of silence, pain, and searching, the light felt different that morning. It didn't just warm her skin, it filled the hollows life had carved inside her. Beautiful view, Damien's voice came gently from behind her. She turned, smiling. It's always been beautiful, Helena replied, voice soft. I just used to see it from the garden, staring up. Now I can finally see it from up here. He walked beside her, hands in his pockets. I couldn't sleep much. Me neither. She looked at him. It still doesn't feel real, seeing you up close, talking to you. Part of me is afraid it'll crumble like a dream. Damien nodded slowly. I used to dream you came back. Even when I told myself I hated you, I still hoped. She blinked at him. You were angry. I had to be, he admitted. I couldn't explain why you were gone, and Dad made it sound like you just disappeared to make our lives easier. I wanted to fight. God knows I did, Helena said, her voice breaking slightly. But courtrooms belong to those with power, and I had none. The only thing I owned was guilt, and that couldn't pay for lawyers, or even a bus ticket. Damien said nothing. He just stood beside her, 2 decades of misunderstandings resting between them, thinning with every second. I would have done anything to stay in your life, she whispered. But when society decides you don't deserve another chance, doors stay locked no matter how long you knock. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Mom. Helena stiffened at the word, not because it hurt, but because it healed. She turned away, dabbing her eyes. I never stopped being a mother. Even when I was nobody's mom in the eyes of the world, I kept thinking about what I'd say if I ever got another chance. What would you say? That I forgive myself, she said. Because if I can't forgive myself, how can I ever ask you to? Damien inhaled deeply, visibly moved. She turned toward him. I know Clarice may come back. You love her. I did, he said, thinking aloud. But now I'm not so sure. She's young, Helena said. She's cruel, he countered. She was afraid. People act ugly when they're trying to protect their pride. Damien raised a brow. Are you defending her? I'm not defending what she did, Helena said carefully. But I've made ugly choices too, and if no one had looked past them, I'd still be folding sheets in silence. He exhaled slowly. Fair enough. They returned to silence for a moment. That kind of silence that wasn't awkward or cold, but thoughtful and real. Then softly, Helena added, Maybe you should ask yourself, if she hadn't been caught, would she have still apologized? He looked at her, the question ringing louder than any sermon. I don't want to be with someone who only treats people with kindness when they think it matters, Damien said. Love isn't just how you treat me. It's how you treat the person who brings you water, who holds the door, who walks silently through the background but holds the house together. Helena smiled again. And for the first time in years, Damien smiled too. Not the charming smile he gave clients, not the formal smile at events. This one was for her, just her. Would you stay? He asked. Not just today. I mean, live here, with me. Help me build something different than the world that tried to erase you. Helena's lips quivered. You want your mother under your roof? I want the woman who survived loss, silence, and humiliation to be the cornerstone of my home. He paused. I want the person I used to dream about to finally be real. She didn't speak. Instead, she set her teacup down and reached out to hold his face in both hands like mothers do when they see their sons as boys again. You're more than I ever dared envision, she said. And yes, it would be my honor. They embraced again, longer this time. Inside the house, Clarice stood just beyond the entryway, luggage in hand, debating whether or not to knock one last time. She'd returned not to beg, but to try, to show she was more than her worst moment. But when she saw them silhouetted against the sunrise, reunited in something deeper than blood, she froze. And just as she lifted her hand, she lowered it. She turned, tears dotting her cheeks, and walked away. Not because she didn't care, but because maybe, for once, it wasn't about her. A month later, the rhythm inside the mansion had changed entirely. The scent of fresh bread replaced the usual takeout orders. Family-style breakfasts were laid out every morning. Nothing extravagant, but everything warm. The sound of laughter replaced the buzz of conference calls, and even the houseplants looked more alive. Miss Helena wasn't just a presence in the house anymore. She was the soul of it. Damien woke up earlier now, drawn by the smell of ginger tea and garlic rice. It reminded him of something just out of memory's reach, soft lullabies, a hug from someone that mattered, the safety of childhood. She greeted him every morning with the same smile. "Eat," she would say, setting food before him. "Don't start fixing the world on an empty stomach." He always ate more than he meant to. Even Bernadette, the young assistant who once floated silently around the house like a living warning not to disturb anything, had relaxed. She smiled more, even joked. And one morning, as she stood in the kitchen beside Helena peeling vegetables, she asked quietly, "Do you ever wish you'd done things differently?" The question wasn't about cooking, and they both knew it. Helena took her time before answering. "I used to. Every day. I replayed choices like broken records. And now? I still wish," she said. "But I don't carry the weight anymore." Bernadette looked over at her, curious. "When life gives you a second chance," Helena continued, "you stop asking the what-ifs and focus on the what now." The words stirred something quiet inside the younger woman, who nodded slowly and returned to slicing bitter melon. That afternoon, Damien invited old friends over for dinner, not business partners, not colleagues, but people who'd known him before the boardrooms and balance sheets. The evening carried warmth. No caviar, no social climbing tension, just food Helena had prepared with stories tucked between every spoonful and a table big enough for laughter. They roasted plantains and steamed vegetables. No one checked emails. No one measured conversation by what it might yield. It was life, unfiltered. One of Damien's old college buddies, Miles, leaned back and smiled during dessert. "I don't remember the last time I had food that tastes like this." Damien nodded. "Homemade always hits different." "Who cooked all this?" another friend asked. Helena was already collecting plates with her usual quiet grace. Damien glanced over at her. "My mother," he said proudly. "She's the real star of the house." Helena froze momentarily, then smiled, blinking back sudden tears as she disappeared into the kitchen. The night was calm until a knock came at the door. Soft, hesitant, timid as a child's. Damien opened it to find Clarice standing in a pale overcoat, not dressed like the woman who once ran the show at lavish parties. No makeup, no heels, just eyes that held weight and pain. "Hi," she said, voice barely audible. "Clarice," Damien replied, guarding his tone carefully. "I won't stay long, I just—" Her hands fidgeted in front of her like they didn't know what to do anymore. "I never got to apologize properly." Damien nodded once but said nothing. "I was raised to be sharp," she said, "to never look back, never second guess, never show weakness." She drew a shaky breath. "I hurt someone I should never have judged, not because she's your mother, but because she was another human being trying her best." "Go on," he said, his arms still crossed. "I understand if you never want anything to do with me again," she continued. "But I didn't come back to fix us. I came back to admit I need fixing, whether we're together or not." Damien looked at her for a while, his silence neither cruel nor forgiving, just thoughtful. "You know, there's something my mom told me after you left," he said. Clarice's heart jumped. It hit her harder than she expected to hear him say the word mom, not in reference to the sleek woman in London who drank Cabernet and hosted fundraisers, but the quiet figure with wrinkled hands who spooned soup into bowls while humming lullabies no one asked for. "What did she say?" "She said, people act ugly when they're trying to protect their pride." He paused. "And that she had made ugly choices once too." Clarice blinked back tears. "She wanted me to forgive you," Damien added. "Not for her, but for me." Clarice let a tear fall. "She's a better woman than I could ever be." "Not better," Helena's voice came from behind them. just older, with more mistakes behind her. Clarice turned quickly, surprised. Helena gave her a kind but tired smile. If you ever become someone else's mother-in-law one day, Helena said softly, be someone she can respect, not someone she fears. I'll remember that, Clarice whispered. Helena nodded, then stepped aside. Would you? Clarice looked back at Damien. Would you let me say thank you to her, in my own way? Damien looked at her, then back at his mother, who gave a small nod. Clarice stepped in, to the house slowly, her whole posture changed. Humbled, soft-spoken. She bowed her head slightly to Helena. Thank you for feeding the man I once loved better than I ever did. Helena held her gaze before saying simply, he always needed more than food. Someone finally gave it to him. Clarice smiled faintly. Someday, I hope I can offer someone the same. Neither of the women said goodbye. They didn't need to. The silence between them contained more truth than words ever could. Damien held the door for Clarice as she left. When he returned inside, Helena was gently wiping the table. She didn't say a word. She didn't gloat. She didn't scold, because real power doesn't need volume. It just needs grace. The days rolled forward softly after that. Nothing about the mansion changed. Not to the blind eye. But if someone walked through its halls, they'd notice the marks of transformation, 2 fresh pairs of slippers by the door. A new recipe tacked to the refrigerator. Warm light left on late at night in the kitchen, just in case someone needed to talk. Helena no longer waited behind doors or disappeared before guests arrived. She answered questions, offered opinions, gently teased Damien when he spent too much time on his phone. He liked it. No, he loved it. It reminded him what all the money in the world couldn't buy. Connection. One evening, while clearing out an old storage cabinet downstairs, Damien found a dusty radio cassette player and smiled. It took him back to memories that hadn't surfaced in decades. Tones, jingles, his mother humming along in the kitchen of a run-down apartment before everything went dark. He brought the machine upstairs. Helena laughed the moment she saw it. Where did you find this dinosaur? I remember this sound from somewhere, Damien said. You used to play it, right, when you'd cook breakfast? Every morning at 6:30 a.m., right after the rosary, she chuckled. He gently placed it on the countertop. Play something. I doubt it even works, Helena said, wiping it off with a towel. They plugged it in, and as luck would have it, the static bloomed into a weathered radio channel just in time for an old familiar tune. The beat kicked in, soft, fluttering, gentle. It was a lullaby more than a song, familiar to every child who grew up in the warmth of Filipino households. Helena's hand reached instinctively toward the air and began to dance with slow fingers, just her and the music. Damien watched her, mesmerized. Do you ever miss dancing? He asked. I still do, she replied softly. In my dreams. Then let's not wait for dreams anymore. He extended his hand. She blinked, surprised. Come on, Mom. She accepted. It wasn't a performance, just a slow, swaying motion in the kitchen, under the small pendant lights. Helena stepped on his foot, twice. I never learned to waltz, she said. Neither did I, he laughed. But no one watching could have guessed. That night, Bernadette peeked from the stairs, tears in her eyes. She knew she was witnessing something sacred, not a dance, but healing set to music. The next morning, Helena prepared Damien's breakfast like usual, except this time she slipped an envelope beside his orange juice glass. What's this? You'll see. Inside was a letter she had written the week after he called her Mom. He read silently. To my son, I may not have raised you, but I carried you. I may not have known your teenage years, your school crushes, your first heartbreak, but I felt the echo of every one of those moments. You weren't lost to me. You were alive in every prayer, every birthday uncelebrated, every Mother's Day I spent cooking for strangers instead of sharing a table with you. I never stopped being your mother. I just had to love you from afar. But now, you're here, and I promise we will make new memories to fill every space-time tried to steal. If I could rewrite the past, I wouldn't erase the pain because it brought you back home. Love always. Mom. Damien folded the paper slowly and lowered his face into his hands. When he looked up again, there wasn't shame, just gratitude. He stood, walked over to Helena and wrapped her in a silent hug. Some things were too big for thank yous. That afternoon, they visited Helena's old neighborhood for the first time together. She pointed out the Sari Sari store she used to borrow rice from, the house where Bernice once lived, the roof that still leaked after all these years. Damien listened quietly. He stopped outside a crumbling building where kids were playing with sticks and discarded car tires. "What is this place?" he asked. "A shelter. It's where I used to drop off extra leftovers from the estates I worked in." Helena watched as a little girl, barefoot, offered her half-eaten cracker to a younger child beside her. She smiled faintly. People without much always find a way to give more. Damien took out his phone and snapped a photo. "Let's fix this place," he said. Her eyes widened. "Fix it?" "No child should be raising other children in the streets. They all deserve what I got, a second chance." Helena put her hand on his arm. "You're becoming a man, not because you have money, but because you finally know how to use it." He looked back at her. "You gave birth to both of those things in me, life and character." Helena stood at the edge of the new garden outside the shelter, her fingers brushing the petals of a young gumamela bush someone had planted the week before. The air smelled of earth and coconut oil. Beside her, Damien spoke with local organizers, planning a small kitchen space inside the renovated building. It had taken just 6 weeks to start transforming the shelter. New windows, fresh paint, hot meals scheduled every evening. Damien had never imagined his name would appear on a donation wall beneath a small brass plaque, but there it was. "This home reborn in memory of love lost and found, donated by Damien Montelier." Helena hadn't asked for this. She would have been content, with breakfast and conversation. But Damien was building more than a bond. He was repairing a lineage. One broken link stretched across time until now. Bernice came to visit next. Wide-hipped, loud-voiced Bernice with her wrinkled brows and judgmental eyebrows that still knew how to arch after all these years. "You look fatter," she told Helena. "I'm happy," Helena replied with a smirk. Bernice squinted. "So you're really living in that mansion now, with your son?" "Mm-hmm." Helena sipped tea. "He makes me breakfast sometimes." She winked. "And he dances with me." Bernice rolled her eyes but couldn't stop smiling. "What about that fiancé of his?" Bernice asked. "We'll see," Helena said. She came back and apologized. Bernice leaned forward. "And you just forgave her?" "I forgave myself, didn't I? And I've done worse." "True," Bernice said too quickly. "People aren't their ugliest moments. They're what they decide to learn from them." Bernice sat back. "That's not forgiveness. That's philosophy. Forgiveness is harder." Helena didn't argue. They both knew that was true. The next day, Damien gathered everyone for something special. Helena thought it would be a business announcement or maybe a volunteer appreciation dinner. But instead, he walked to the front of the shelter's new dining area, took a deep breath, and tapped the microphone gently. "I used to think legacy was about resume lines," he began, smiling awkwardly. "You know, mergers, assets, portfolios. But recently, I learned legacy is simpler than that. Sometimes it looks like garlic rice at dawn and handwritten letters." Laughter rippled warmly through the crowd. He glanced toward Helena, who was already dabbing her eyes with her handkerchief. "I found my mother not in another country, but in a role we often ignore. She had been in plain sight, unseen, undervalued, but irreplaceable." He paused. Even the children in the shelter were quiet now. "So today, this shelter, which will be feeding hundreds of kids weekly, won't be named after a brand or company. It'll carry a name few have remembered, but one I will never forget." He turned and gestured toward the sign now being pulled back to reveal the engraved letters. "The Helena Home for Hopeful Hearts." Helena let out a noisy, maternal gasp that made everyone laugh and clap at once. Damien descended from the platform and wrapped his arms around her, laughing into her hair as she whispered, "I don't deserve this." He pulled back, holding her shoulders. "Everything I am, every good in me, is because someone once raised me with love before the world tried to take it away. You deserve much more than this, Mom. But this is just the beginning." That night, after everyone was gone and only the crickets kept watch, Damien and Helena sat on the back steps of the shelter watching the stars rise behind the trees. "Why did you name it after me and not yourself?" she asked. "I run businesses," he said softly. "You gave life." Helena leaned against his shoulder. For a moment, there was peace. Real peace. Then, in the gentle dark, Helena whispered for the first time something she had never dared say aloud in years. "I thought I was going to die alone." Damien turned, startled by the confession. "For so many years I was just trying to survive," she said. "Every ache I ignored, every bus ride back from a job I hated, every insult I swallowed, because I thought, if I can just last one more year, maybe I'll see him again." Damien didn't respond right away. He just reached for her hand and held it tightly. "You'll never be alone again," he said. "I know," she whispered. "That's what still surprises me." He chuckled quietly. "Why?" "Because love isn't something you're owed. It's something people give. And you gave it back." The night curled around them like a blanket. In a world that had once discarded her, Helena had become something more powerful than the labels she'd worn. Not a housemaid, not a fugitive mother, not even just Damien's mom. She had become proof that no matter how far someone falls, no matter how invisible they become in their darkest chapters, grace has a memory, and it finds its way back, sometimes even with garlic rice. Months passed. The world didn't stop turning. The rains came and went. Elections were won. Economies shifted, people got married, some got divorced, and children were born. But inside a quiet piece of the city, at a shelter named after a woman once forgotten, lives were being patched back together, heart by heart, meal by meal. Helena still lived with Damien. She planted herbs near the kitchen window. She sewed buttons onto his shirts when they popped off. She taught Bernardet how to fry eggplant properly, how to scent laundry without expensive detergent, how to know when someone was sad from the way they stirred their coffee. She was no longer the help. She was family. One morning, Damien left for a conference in Hong Kong. Helena saw him off with her usual motherly checklist: passport, snacks, jacket, reminders to call. He promised to check in often. But while he was gone, something unexpected happened. Clarisse came back, not with heels, not with attitude, but with 2 large boxes and a single pair of flats, her hair in a bun. "May I come in?" she asked Helena at the gate. Helena studied her. Wordlessly, she opened the gate and stepped aside. Clarisse set the boxes down gently. "I sorted through some old things I bought while I was still planning our wedding. I thought maybe the shelter could use them. Cutlery, towels, unopened hygiene kits. Nothing fancy. Just things that shouldn't go to waste." Helena nodded as her eyes scanned the items. Clarisse hesitated. "Also, I left my pride at home today." That earned a slow, crooked smile from Helena. "I won't ask for forgiveness," Clarisse continued. "I don't deserve it, even if I've changed, but I do want to be useful, if you'll let me." "Can you cook?" Clarisse blinked. Well, can you learn?" "Yes." "Then you can stay for lunch." That day, Clarisse chopped onions for the shelter kitchen while wiping her tears with the side of her sleeve. That night, she went home smelling of garlic and humility, and it felt better than any perfume she'd worn. When Damien returned, Helena gave him updates like a friend retelling scenes from a quiet film. "She's been helping," Helena said of Clarisse, slicing mangoes. "Still doesn't know how to stir without splashing herself, but she's trying." Damien smiled. "She really came back?" "She came back with full hands and an empty heart. That's usually a good sign." "And what about you?" he asked gently. Are you okay? I don't think I've said this out loud, Helena said, but when I left you as a child, after years of feeling like a disgrace, I told myself that if I ever came back into your life, I wouldn't expect anything. Damien raised a brow. And? I've gotten more than I ever could have asked for. She looked at him, her expression full of something that couldn't quite be named. Relief, pride, sorrow, joy. But it was whole. Damien didn't respond with words. He just leaned forward and kissed her forehead. That week, he announced that Helena would be overseeing the running of the community programs under the Helena Home for Hopeful Hearts, not in a business capacity, but as its matriarch, the person who made sure the bread didn't just arrive, but that it was served while warm and with care. Volunteers now called her Tita Helena. The children called her Nane. One night, after the younger volunteers went home and Clarice helped clean the last of the rice pots, she sat beside Helena and quietly asked, Do you think I'm still the same person? Helena responded without hesitation. Would the person you once were even think to ask that question? Clarice breathed out slowly. So there's hope for me? Helena looked, her directly in the eye, her voice calm. There's always hope for those willing to change their hands, as well as their hearts. And that was the unspoken truth about second chances. They often arrive quietly, not with applause, but with aprons, not as a reversal of the past, but as a rewriting of the future. As they turned off the shelter lights for the night, Clarice watched Helena lock the doors like a mother making sure all her children were safe before she laid down to rest. She smiled. Maybe this wasn't the fairy tale ending she once wanted, the wedding, the designer dress, the Pinterest-perfect life. But maybe this was redemption. In a faded home, beneath weathered walls, guided by a woman everyone once disregarded, she had found grace. And that was better. Because grace doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it walks in gently, wearing house shoes,